Long ago, in northern Iceland, lived a young deacon who served his church faithfully and was known to be patient, kind, and desperately in love with a beautiful young woman who lived on a farm across the valley. The young couple were set to be wed after Christmas, and the young deacon promised he would come to her before the holiday so the pair could plan for their upcoming nuptials. On Christmas Eve, the young man saddled his horse and rode out into the snow to meet his love. Yet as he and his trusty steed journeyed through the frosty night, they fell victim to inclement weather. As they approached the dark river, the powdery snow turned to driving, icy rain. Wind whipped through the valley, and the river swelled. The rain-soaked ground turned icy and slick, and as the lightning streaked across the inky sky, the sound of thunder frightened the horse. As the deacon and his horse tried to battle through the storm, the river continued to surge. In an attempt to reach the more stable banks on the other side of the river, the deacon led his horse to a frozen path across the rushing water. Yet, as they began the crossing, a patch of thin ice fell out from beneath them, and they were plunged into the freezing water below. On Christmas Day, a shepherd, attending to his flock, discovered the bodies, washed up on the banks of the now still river. The deacon was quickly buried in the local churchyard, and instead of a wedding, a funeral was held. Due to the weather, no one had been able to inform the deacon's fiancée. Patiently, she waited for her lover to call upon her. On New Year's Day, as the northern lights danced across the velvet sky, a knock was heard at the young lady's front door. She ran to answer it, only able to put one arm into her coat before throwing open the door. There stood her lover. He was ashen, stiff and silent, but he was there. As she threw her arms around him in delight, he felt cold and damp. But that wasn't too unusual. Come in, she pleaded with excitement. Please come and warm yourself by the fire. Without speaking, the deacon shook his head and held out a gray hand. Confused but eager to be with her lover, the young woman placed her hand in his as he led her to his noble steed. As they rode through the night, the young woman realized a hat covering the deacon's head. Yet as they came to the river, the horse tripped and the hat fell into the black water. As the woman looked up, she realized that the back of the deacon's head was a cavernous hole. He had obviously sustained a terrible injury, and the wound was deep, red, and oozing. As the silver moon broke through the clouds, the young woman could clearly see her lover's skull. The deacon turned to his love and said, "The moon fades. Death rides. Do you see a white spot on the back of my head?" Horrified, the young woman whispered, "I see what is." Paralyzed in fear, the woman sat silent as the couple continued on. When they reached the church the pair were to be married at, the deacon said, "The moon glides as death rides. I must bring my bride." As the deacon dismounted, the young woman came to a horrible realization. The horse had been silent the entire journey. Not a whinny, not a sigh, not even the sound of hooves on the rocky path. Her lover only grew colder, no matter how fiercely she held on to him. And as she looked down, she saw his riding boots were on backwards. And he wasn't taking her to the chapel, but rather to a freshly dug grave. The deacon grabbed her arm, attempting to pull her into his grave, but she had never fully put on her coat. So as he grabbed at an empty sleeve, the coat split in half. The woman scampered off and ran to the church gates. There stood the church bell, and with all her might she rang and rang and rang, and as the bell tolled through the night, her lover cried out in distress. He wasn't enraged or angry. He was in anguish, mourning his life and the loss of his lover. As the sound of the bell washed through the churchyard, the young deacon and his horse retreated to their grave and disappeared among the earth. Alone in the churchyard, the woman fell to her knees and wept, her cries carrying on the wind like a tragic, sorrowful song. Happy New Year, West London Witch listeners. I hope you have all had a relaxing and restorative holiday season. I am beyond thrilled to start 2026 by sharing more spooky stories with you all. This year, if you're looking to support small bespoke content creators, why not join us on Patreon? In addition to unlocking loads of exclusive content, you can feel good about championing two creatives. The West London Witch isn't a large corporation, but rather the true definition of a cottage industry. For as little as £1, $1, €1 a month, you can help keep these spooky stories flowing. So why not join us on patreon.com/The West London Witch. Hello, and welcome to episode 105 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. In 2019, my now husband Kyle and I headed to the land of fire and ice for the most wonderful Icelandic adventure. We were set to go back in 2020, but COVID. Then we rescheduled for 2021, but once again, COVID. So finally, Kyle brought Iceland to us here in England as he asked me to marry him in a magical and whimsical Iceland-inspired proposal. During 2020, when the West London Witch first began, one of our very first episodes, episode 5, The Cave People, featured the story of Iceland's last cave dwellers. All of us here at the West London Witch love that episode, and it's still one of my all-time favorites. But it's literally been years since we have returned to the Frostland, so I thought that we would start 2026 in a truly bewitching fashion. Today, Anna, the manager of the Museum of Sorcery and Witchcraft, has joined us to share the legends, practices, and history of magic in Iceland, and in particular, the witch trials of the 1600s. The Museum of Sorcery and Witchcraft has been open for 25 years and is dedicated to preserving, sharing, and honoring those whose lives were shaped and destroyed by the accusation of being a witch. It is important to note that Icelandic is one of the most lyrical, melodic, and beautiful languages in the world. And I don't speak a single word of it. Apologies in advance for the butcherings to come. I promise you I really, really have tried my best, and I have left Anna to do the majority of the pronunciations. But for now, it's time for us to draw in close. Light a candle and hold your protective runes close to your heart. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is the West London Witch. Episode 105, The Age of Fire.
I am Anna, and I am the manager of the Museum of Sorcery and Witchcraft in Iceland. And the museum opened in 2000, and we tell the story of the witch craze in Iceland and how witchcraft was practiced and what people believed you were able to achieve with magic here in Iceland. We are in the northwest of Iceland, and that's where most of the witchcraft cases were.
From 1625 to 1683, a frantic moral panic swept across the stark and wild landscape of Iceland. Traditionally, in Iceland, magic and folk beliefs had been commonplace and were not seen as evil, dangerous, or satanic, but rather a force for protection and power. However, in the early 1600s, Iceland was ruled by the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark was heavily influenced by European ideas of witchcraft and saw it as a dark and demonic art. In 1617, Denmark introduced the Danish Witchcraft Ordinance to the people of Iceland. This law officially prohibited any and all magic and doled out heavy penalties to anyone convicted of practicing witchcraft. This new European standard and understanding of magic really rocked Iceland and led to a period of true horror and darkness.
Here, magic, we have a lot of words for magic, and that kind of gives you the idea, or it's probably that it was something that was discussed and it was part of the culture. For example, like the Eskimos have 100 words for snow. We have many words for magic, and so it seemed to be an important part of the culture. And the words, they are often very connected to knowledge and education. And the old stories about witches were like, it was often priests. So the Catholic priests, Iceland became Christian in the year 1000, and the priests were the most educated men around the time. And so, we connected often magic with them, that they were often doing magic.
Witch trials in Europe primarily focused on women, specifically those who were elderly, single, or poor. However, the victims accused of witchcraft in Iceland were a completely different demographic.
What people find most interesting or shocking when they come is that there were mainly men that were burned for witchcraft here in Iceland. It was not women. So it was a bit different than in Europe.
Around 90% of all the witch burnings in Iceland were actually done on men. Magic in Iceland was associated with knowledge, literacy, runic knowledge, and education, something afforded traditionally to the male population. Most men accused were learned men, like farmers who were known to be bright, clever, and resourceful, men who owned grimoires or spellbooks, or books detailing ancient runes and sigils, and people who openly practiced pagan rituals. You could also be accused of being a witch if you were in disputes with your neighbors or fellow townsfolk, or if you were socially isolated. European witches were known to worship Satan, participate in satanic pacts, or cavort with demons, where Icelandic witches seem to be accused for more practical reasons. Whether they were thieving through magical practice, ruining fishing, bringing bad weather, causing illness to cattle, or bringing dire fates upon their neighbors, Icelandic witches were typically accused of real harm and destruction through the use of their magic.
There were 21 persons who were burned for witchcraft, but only one woman. So 20 men and only one woman. There were more women who were accused of witchcraft, but sometimes the case wasn't strong enough that they were accused, or they were able to free them from the accusation. The legal system was that if you got 12 peers, other people, like if a woman, she would get 12 women to vouch or take an oath that she was not a witch or never done that witchcraft. You could free yourself from these charges. And also for men, like they have to get 12 men. The only woman who was burned for witchcraft was actually, she had just moved to the area. She was from North Iceland. She came here with her son. And then actually the son had mentioned something that it is in records, that he had mentioned that they were able to walk all the way from North Iceland to Westfjords without touching water because he knew some magic. It was probably some, boy bragging, making up some stories, but somehow, yeah. And then this priest, he accused them of witchcraft, and because they were new in the area, they were not able to get anyone to take an oath for them. So, and that was the only woman who were burned for witchcraft.
Although women were largely spared from witchcraft accusations, it was rumored that there were certain types of magic that only women could perform.
This magic is to create a creature that's called tilberi. And this is a creature that goes out and steals milk from sheep and cow. So how to make this creature is that a woman has to go into a graveyard on a Whit Sunday night, on a holy night, and she has to dig out a body and rip out a rib from someone. And she will wrap this rib in wool, and then she goes to church 3 times and take the holy wine, but she doesn't drink it, but she will spit it on the bone. And then it's very convenient. She will probably hide it in her bosom between her breasts, so she can spit it secretly on it. No one will notice. And when she's done it 3 times, there will 2 heads on both ends of the rib, and this kind of it's like a worm. And then she will feed it from her own body fluid. She will make a hole on her thigh, inner thigh, and it will suck on the hole there and drink her blood. And it will grow, and it will wrap around her leg, and she will hide it under the skirt. Of course, she wants to hide it because it's witchcraft, and you don't want anyone to know about that. And also, this creature steals, so you're a thief. But when it's fully grown, she can send him out, and he will go and drink milk from the sheep and cows. So he has 2 heads, so he can drink with both heads until he's full, and then he kind of is like a bowl, and he rolls back home, and he pukes everything in a churn where she will make a butter. So she will use the milk to make a butter. And this creature, it loves its mom. It does everything for their mom. And if you suspect that someone has made the butter from this stolen milk, from this tilberi, you can carve a symbol. It's kind of like a star called butternut. And if you carve that on the butter and it will explode, that means it's a tilberi butter. If a woman, of course, it's kind of hard to maintain this creature because it's drinking your blood. So if a woman cannot maintain it anymore, she's old or pregnant or whatever it is, she had 2 ways to kill it. One way is to carve this butternut symbol on a silver bullet and shoot it. And the other way is to command it to go and pick up every lamb dropping in the tri-state area, or very big area, And of course the tilberi loves its mom, and will do anything for her. And he will go on the mountain trying to do it. And of course he cannot do it. And he will just be completely full and explode. Sometimes you see piles of sheep shit on the mountains and, pieces of wool. Maybe that's exploded tilberi.
If you thought a two-headed milk-thieving worm was wacky, just wait until you hear about an ancient Icelandic practice of waking the dead. Through this ritual, you could create your very own zombie that would answer to your will and command and could avenge your enemies. This ritual begins by the practitioner heading to the graveyard to pick out which dead body they would like to dig up and reanimate. But be careful. Creating a zombie servant is no easy task, and it is not for the faint-hearted.
You have to be careful when you choose them because they will be twice as strong as they were when they were alive. And also stronger the fresher they are. So if it's someone who's been dead a long time, missing a limb, is not as strong as someone who's freshly dead. All right, you choose carefully, then you start your ritual to wake them up. And the head comes out first. And it has like this saliva, kind of like, it's saliva around the mouth. And then the first step of the sorcerer or the witch is to grab the head and lick the saliva off, because that's the first step of overpowering them. You're showing them who's the boss. And then you will continue until he comes completely out of the ground. And of course, they're not happy because you've woken them up. They were dead and peaceful there, and you just woke them up and they will attack you. And then it was very important that you chose carefully because you will have to fight them and win. Like wrestle, they mention most of the time, wrestling them. Cannot shoot them, they're anyway dead, so you just have to wrestle them and hold them down and show them you're the boss. And then they will become your servant. And that was the aim of waking someone up from the death. It was not because you loved someone, you wanted them back. It was just to get a servant or someone, to do something. So a servant who will go and you can send them to your enemy. It was not serving you in the home, but it was like, maybe doing some bad deeds for you. And they were often like extension of the magic or the power of the sorcerer or a witch. So they can send him to their enemy and they were able to do magic there.
As absolutely fascinating as these traditions are, there is one artifact in the museum that is world-renowned and is truly unlike anything else I have ever heard of before.
Our crown jewel, which are the necropants.
Yes, you heard that correctly. Necropants. Hold on to your butts for this one. Literally, necropants are pants fashioned from the skin of the lower half of a dead man's body and are worn like pants.
This is a magic to get money, actually. That's why you would make a necropants. But to do it, you have to make a signed contract with someone who's alive that you're allowed to skin them waist down. And it has to be a man. So you cannot make a contract with a woman. That's not useful for this. So, and when they die, you have to dig them up and have to skin them waist down and without leaving any hole. You're not allowed to, kill them and cheat like that, but you just have to wait. And you will do that. And then you will need one coin, stolen coin from a poor widow. And you have a necropant symbol, the magical symbol of the necropants, just on paper. Nothing special, blood, just have the symbol and the stolen coin. Put this in the scrotum. And that's why it's important it's a man. So you put it in the scrotum. And then you put the pants on. You just put them on yourself. And so it will become like your own skin. It's not... So it doesn't matter the size of the person you made them from. Like they will become like your own. And then, of course, you just wear normal pants over them. And the thing is that you can always reach your hand into the scrotum and get out a coin. So the coin will multiply. You have to be careful not to take out the original one. But you have to take, So you can always reach out and get some money. You had to be very careful not to die in them, because if you would die in these pens, then your soul will burn for eternity in the hellish fires, and it will be very bad. So you need someone else to take them over, to put them on, and you cannot just take them off like normal pens. You have to take one leg out, and the other person comes in with one leg, and then the other one, and the other person goes straight into them.
There are wonderful stories about families passing down a pair of necropants from one generation to the other, like a fleshy heirloom. However, sadly, no real necropants have ever been found. These stories are merely folklore, and it's likely that they never existed outside of myths and legends. But necropants do highlight how legend, magic, superstition, and ancient beliefs were tightly woven into the fabric of everyday life in Iceland. The museum may not have a real pair of necropants, but they do have a replica on display. And as you can imagine, they are wildly popular. But fleshy coin purses and zombies aside, if you were suspected of practicing witchcraft, you didn't need to be accused of creating something like a two-headed milkworm. The mere act of your neighbor's cow dying was enough to throw suspicion onto you. And once accused, the punishments were fierce.
A lot of persons were punished, not everyone were burned. The most common punishment was to be whipped, and often to be whipped until you're closer to death than be alive. So we don't know if probably a lot of people died from their wounds.
In addition to being burned alive or beaten to near death, witches could also be heavily fined, forced to pay restitution to the victims of their magical acts. Their magical manuscripts or grimoires could be seized, and they could be banished or exiled from their homes and communities. Needless to say, it was a dark and scary time.
The reason why people are burned for magic is because they believe the devil was part of you.
It's important to note that Iceland does not have a lot of forests. Wood is a highly precious resource. Due to centuries of grazing, charcoal production, and the aftermath of the cooling of the Little Ice Age, Iceland in the 1600s was much more raw and barren than it is today. You need a lot of wood to burn a person alive. Sometimes the timber from the accused witch's home was used to create the pyre that they would be set to burn upon. Imagine watching your house being torn apart in order for you to be burned alive. From a modern lens, the quote-unquote crimes that set these accused witches to the flames seem positively, medieval. And because of Iceland's rich traditions of magic, some of the accused witches put themselves into terrible situations.
For example, further north where the museum is, there was some strange sickness that the people started to experience, especially in the church, and young women. And they start fainting or burping and acting very strange and in the church, and they couldn't explain it except it could be magic. And then they looked around, and there was one farmer who was actually quite successful. And, he was a good farmer. He was doing good. And probably he was using some kind of, you can call it magic or superstition, where's the mark, where's the border. So probably maybe he was using some, protective symbols or something, when he went fishing or something. And he was accused of magic, and he actually confessed that he had done magic. He did not confess to this, But he confessed that he saw the devil in the form of a fox, of an arctic fox, and sent him somewhere. I don't know. Like, there were often, in the witchcraft cases in Iceland, there were often confessions. And we don't know. I often get the question, like, were people tortured to get the confession? But we don't know that. There's no record of that. So we cannot say for sure. And some cases could be that this was kind of like common, like magic in a way to use a symbol, like, maybe a protective symbol. For example, we have the Helm of Awe. It kind of looks like a snowflake, and it's a protection sign to give you courage and especially to protect you from the people in power of their anger. Yeah. And that's always relevant everywhere, I think. So that you have used something like that or had some runes, that was enough proof that you were doing magic.
Corruption and collusion are sadly not new concepts. And it is clear that at times nepotism played a huge part in the Icelandic witch craze.
Here in the Northwest, in the Westfjords, we had 2 sheriffs. And there's often, people involved and people who have power. So one sheriff had been studying in Holland, and then he learned about the witch crazes there. And the other one had a half-brother who was priest, and that priest had studied in Denmark and also learned about the witch hunts there. And he was, at the time, he was very well educated.
This priest was not only incredibly well educated, but he was also very well connected. He ran in elite and powerful circles. His time in Europe had inspired him to really study the world of magic, and he was responsible for writing the Icelandic version of the Witch's Hammer, or as you may know it, the Malleus Maleficarum, a hideous medieval text that served as the blueprint for identifying and punishing witches. However, this priest's family continued to fall ill. They were plagued with a rash of sickness and misfortune, and he knew that there could only be one reason: witchcraft.
And then he was accusing people around. The first victim was a man who used to work on their farm. He was a priest and he was also running a farm. So he got a nice land, and there was a man working there, and he wanted to marry one of the girls who were working there. And they didn't allow it, and he was sent away. And then the wife got sick, and then he connected it that he must have caused it, because he was unhappy that he couldn't marry the girl. And he was accused and burned because, his half-brother was a sheriff. So it was very, this was an unfortunate family connection.
Justice was swift, and the penalties were harsh. The trials were not always founded in fact, but in the late 1600s, the Icelandic witch craze began to finally come to an end, and it finished off almost as quickly as it began.
The last sentence to be burned, that was a man who was very unpopular. So that was mainly, he was actually accused of stealing. It started with that, he was accused of stealing, but then later, then he was accused of causing some sickness, and then he was burned.
Although Sveit Arneson may have been the last man burned in 1683, 9 years later, in 1692, another gentleman by the name of Clemis Bjarnason was accused of sorcery by causing illness in 2 local women. One of the women was even reported to have died due to his magical influence. Coincidentally, these accusations may have arose from a long-standing quarrel over property rights and stolen driftwood. This made Clemis most unpopular in town, and he was unable to convince any of his neighbors or the local townsfolk to swear an oath on his behalf. There was no real evidence to convict him, but because of his reputation and standing in the community, Clemis did not stand a chance.
He was sentenced to be burned. But the thing is that Iceland was part of the Danish kingdom, and the king had decided shortly before that every death sentences should be final saying was in the Denmark. So they changed actually this sentence into exile.
A 1691 letter from the King of Denmark stated that Clemus's sentence would be commuted to exile from Iceland. He was sent to Copenhagen, where he remained in custody, waiting the implementation of his banishment order. However, before his exile could come into legal effect, he died, likely due to illness.
So after this, there was no witch burnings in Iceland.
Over a period of 60 years, around 120 to 130 people were accused of witchcraft, 21 of whom died. Almost all of their sentences were carried out at the stake. Although the Icelandic witch craze was objectively shorter and less prolific than its European counterparts, it is a dark and grisly stain on history. However, like all witch trials, there are many modern lessons to be learned here. The Icelandic witch trials exemplify how easy power can corrupt and how justice can be misused and driven by fear, not logic, reason, or science. These trials remind us that progress is fragile, fear is catching, and justice systems require constant monitoring and a willingness to evolve with the times.
So when I have people coming here and I tell them the stories and I tell them about this dark time actually in Iceland, I want people to take the knowledge that we have to be careful always to not let the people with the least power to pay the price for the power-greedy ignorance of the powerful people.
The Museum of Sorcery and Witchcraft does not exist to sensationalize the past. Through careful scholarship, preserved artifacts, and stories rooted in real lives, the museum gives a voice to people who were once feared, silenced, or misunderstood. And it reminds us how fragile reason can be when fear takes hold. If you ever find yourself in the West Fjords, it's worth a visit. It's not just a museum, but a space for memory, context, and reflection. Because understanding how witch hunts happened is one of the best ways to make sure that we don't repeat their logic in new forms. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.